This is a 2000 Saturn SL2. And I'm just going to give a couple tips on replacing the spark plugs for people who might not have done this before. I've probably worked on, I don't know, at least 150 different cars. And that's not a lot compared to most people, but I have learned a few things. And when I took off one of these spark plugs, I noticed it was way over torqued, meaning it was put on way too tight. And I thought, you know, I'll probably just do a little video on this. It might help some people. My dog, hey, come. Hey, come here. Doesn't obey. Come here. Good dog. All right, so one thing that's helpful, kind of lay your stuff out in a way that is relatively clean and orderly, so you have your stuff where you need it when you reach for it. We're going to be working on just the spark plugs, and I'm going to give a couple tips. This is for newbies. If you know a lot about cars and you know a lot about spark plugs, move along. You're not going to get anything out of this video at all. The very first car I had was a 1974 Honda Civic. Probably I worked on that on or about 1979, 1980, right when I was at the end of my high school era or somewhere around there. And I cross-threaded a spark plug, which means putting it in incorrectly. So what does that mean? If you look here, you can see that there's several features to this. Threads, the gap, the space right there, spark plug gap, ceramic insulation, and this metal core, right? So you have several features on a spark plug, all of which can give you problems. All right, now, one of the first things you're going to want to do if you're going to be working on spark plugs is choose a good quality spark plug. One way to tell if it's a better quality spark plug is simply by opening up the box, and you can kind of hear there's no way to avoid that bouncing around. I used to work for United Parcel Service, and I used to unload 40-foot trucks that had those boxes in them, and there would be a layer of dust on these boxes that you couldn't see from the end of the 40-foot trailer to the front and the back because of the dust. So you had to wear a dust mask if you were smart. I did. And here's one thing you're going to be looking for is, does it have one of those on it? What's that? Well, it's a plastic protector to keep it from bouncing around, which protects the spark plug gap. So let's just start with, here's the new spark plugs, and you can kind of look and see the space between that metal tip and this is called the gap. Now there's a gapping tool that you can use to check the gaps, and you can look at the old plug and see carbon buildup, and you can often see that the gap increases in size, but the metal eventually goes away. It doesn't last forever. And sometimes the OEM plug, which is the original equipment manufacturer plug, is the best plug to use. Sometimes the least expensive plug is the correct plug, and using a more expensive plug is really not recommended. Some of these plugs you want to replace every 10,000 or 30,000 or 50,000 or even every 100,000 miles. Follow the recommended plug life by looking in your owner's manual. Now, the ceramic insulation here can break, and this metal core that's going to try and send the electrical charge from here down through there can short out through this housing right here. So when we're putting the plugs in, you'll see that this is potentially going to break. So you got to be really careful with that, and that can cause problems. But you can just look at the plugs when you take them out and make damn sure that they look like they're pretty much the same size. if this is longer than the plug you've taken out, then as the piston comes up to compress the gasoline and the spark ignites and presses the piston back down, the piston head will come up and hit this plug, and that will destroy the piston. So right there, here's another tool. It's a magnetic tray, holds onto your bolts so that, you know, when you drop stuff in there, it stays there. A couple other things is, this is called anti-seize lubricant. What is anti-seize? It goes on the thread. Okay, put a little bit of that stuff on there. Spread it around. You don't have to put a whole bunch of it, but definitely some is better than none. And then when you go to take this off in 30,000 or 100,000 miles, well, you basically are going to be able to get it off. It won't be stuck in there. Okay, so standard socket. It's got our little release mechanism here, right? Different directions. 5/8 is usually about the right size. Okay. And the way the socket works is there should be a space for the tip of the plug to go in. So it's not just any socket. It has to be something that it properly accommodates the spark plug. All right, now on the Saturn, interestingly enough, there's a harness that holds down these coils that I have not really seen on a lot of vehicles. In fact, I don't think I've seen them on any vehicles. I don't really think you need it, but if you want to put it on, then you can. But there's a metal, see if I can get a good glimpse of it in there somehow. Kind of tell down there, there's a metal, and then this is the rubber boot. So you have the tip of the spark plug down there, and you want to put this in so that you hear a click. Okay, and there's a little click. You pull up and you can check. Push down and you hear a click. So I've already done this, this, and this, and now I have one plug left. And like I said, there's a certain sound that you want to hear. Now, a good set of spark plugs should be different lengths, because the distance from the end of the plug that goes on to the coil, right? This is the ignition coil. I have another video on this because I just replaced these ignition coils, and this flat plate here that mounts onto the engine is the ignition module. You can see how this moves right there, because these new style ignition coils are different than the old ones, and I have a different video on that. So this is supposed to go here and hold the spark plugs on, and I didn't have any bolts there, so there was 2 bolts missing, and those need to be longer than the bolt that goes on the bottom. The bolt that goes on the bottom is the same diameter and thread and all that. It's a number 8, but it needs to be longer, so I can't finish this job. All right, so you're looking for a particular sound. Now, everybody knows a certain sound when they hear it. When you're in a movie theater and you hear this sound, well, you know somebody snuck in a can and they just opened it. Oh, poor little dragonfly. Oh well, I used to be terrified of these things when I was a kid. Anyway, the sound you're listening for when you put it on and take it off is not just that rubber boot, but the metal clip. So you got to make sure that metal clip is on there, and you can learn to feel it. Like right now I can feel it. But if you grab these wires, let's say this was the old wire, and you just yank these things up, sometimes what can happen is the metal clip down there, you can see that metal gets stuck to the top of the spark plug, and you pull the wire, and as you're pulling the wire, you'll literally pull the wire away from the metal clip, and the metal clip will stay stuck to the top of the plug. So that's one of the reasons why you want to use some grease, right? So you have this dielectric grease. You can use it on the top of the plug, and also a little bit around here on this housing. And that way you've got your anti-seize on the threads, this dielectric grease, which will help prevent corrosion between the two pieces of metal so that they stick together, and also help the boot not grab onto that thing so tight that you can't get the boot off. Sometimes if you have trouble getting the boot off, you can kind of spin it around a little bit and see if you can get it to loosen up before you start just pulling it up. All right, so this is my last wire. This is the number 1, 2, 3, 4, and the way they go on the coil, the coils in this case, there's 2 of them there, is I believe it's 4, 1, 2, 3. So another trick is, here's the old setup, right? Goes like that down there, and as you can see, I've labeled it 4, 1, 2, 3. That way the what's called the firing order goes correctly, and you don't screw it up, because you just don't hook them up 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. They go a certain order. The reason why is because if it went 1, 2, 3, 4 and it fired that way, the engine would rock, right? So it goes 4, I think it goes like this. I think it goes 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. I think it goes like that, which gives the engine a little bit of a rock, but it's balanced, right? Critically important, you don't want to cross thread, meaning putting the spark plug in a way that screws up the threads. So those are the old ones. They're properly labeled. I know exactly which direction they go back on. I already know how that goes, so I can just toss it down there. I want to go back to this for a second. If you look at the new coils, you can kind of tell they're sort of round, completely different looking than these. So these two were on there and they were next to each other, so they look like that. And then you see there's a clip here at the top of the coils, so when it goes into the ignition coil, it goes in and then clips down and has those 2 spaces right there where the prongs on the ignition module go into this. So there's a screw on the bottom and a screw on the top, as I discussed, and then there's a metal clip down on the bottom. So you have to be able to reach down there and get that, and then there's this wire harness right there, and so you have 1 bolt down here, another bolt over here, another bolt here, and another bolt here. And as I said before, these 2 top bolts are longer, so I got to deal with that later. You probably want to disconnect your battery, positive red, negative black. Don't want to lose that, so let's stick it over there. When you're working on anything electrical, it's a good idea, because you could always hit this with a socket. As you're turning something, you could hit this and cause some arcing. If you've ever done that before, it's pretty much 4th of July right there in your face, and it can screw up a lot of things at once. All right, so socket goes down there, and this is counterclockwise, right? This is clockwise. So looking at it as a clock. Some people say lefty, righty. I don't know, man. It's kind of hard to remember. The way I always remembered it was we used to say right on when we were kids. We'd say right on, man. I don't know why we said that, but that's what we said. And I used to think one. I don't try to remember both. I try to remember one. Right on, meaning turning to the right. The other way is left off, like you got left off of a ship, left off. But clockwise is tightening, counterclockwise is loosening. So one of the things that you want to remember when you're working on these is not over torquing things. So let's see how tight this last one is. Oh, that was pretty loose. That came out real easy. Okay, so all right, so that came off super easy. And you can start to feel where it's pretty much loose, and you're going to want to take it out. So right there, it's pretty much ready to pull out. Now, one problem can be that you go to lift up the socket and the spark plug doesn't come out, but in this case it did. And again, you look at the old spark plug, compare it to the new one, you look at carbon buildup and the gap and all that sort of stuff. But these plugs are, you know, they've been there for a while. You got your anti-thread. I've already put my dielectric grease on there. You don't need a lot. Okay, now this is where you don't want to cross thread. Now, the reason I opened up the can is because of that sound. Okay, now, I don't know if I'm going to be able to hear this sound, but I'm going to go backwards before I go forward. Okay, now, let's see if we can hear it. Yeah, right there. Okay, so right there was a sound that I was listening for where it dropped into place. Before I start tightening, I'm going left. Okay, I'm gonna go around one full turn again, see if I can get it to make that sound again. Yeah, right there, I felt it. So it popped down into the seat. And then when I get that feeling that I can start to turn it tightening, now I've gone about 2 full turns, probably about 3 full turns, probably that's about 4. Let's say that's about 5 full turns, and right there's about 6 maybe. And at some point it's going to say that's enough. Okay, so about 6 1/4, 6.5 turns, and it's pretty much tight. Now, what do I mean it drops into place? Well, you're looking for where the thread starts. And by going backwards, the thing will lift up and then it'll drop down and you'll feel it. And then you want to turn a couple full turns, and as you do, the thing will start to thread in place. You do not want to cross thread it. My throat is dry. Perfect timing. Okay. Now, okay, I'm gonna see right there. I was able to get that almost completely tight. How tight is that? Not very tight. You don't really need to put it on that tight. Okay, and that's about as much as you need to tighten it. Now, if I want to put these things on, I can. You know, stick them on there and go through all that nonsense. I don't really think I need them, but stick them on there anyway. I don't like them because I noticed I had to pull both of these things out at the same time, and I don't really like that. But let's see how this goes. Okay, I pushed it down. I'm gonna pull it up. I pulled by the wire, but you want to pull by this housing. It's kind of hard to do with that harness on there. Okay, push it down again. It's gonna go over the metal. Okay, right there. Okay, so that's something to check. Okay, so I pulled it up, and I'm gonna stick that little harness on there if I can find it. Oh, it might have fallen somewhere. As always, something has to go wrong. I'm not sure where that little metal clip is. Anyway, I don't really need it, so yeah, it's on there. This is on there. That's on there, and that's on there. And if you want that harness on, you just tighten it down. It really doesn't need to be that tight. That's a 10 millimeter. Okay, so tightening it down. And it's just holding that thing in place. It's kind of superfluous, which is a fancy way of saying not needed. That's pretty much it. So I went over the importance of checking how long your plug is compared to your new plug, making sure it's the correct length. If it doesn't look like it's the same length, stop everything and make damn sure before you go any further. I went over the importance of having a good set of plug wires so that you end up with, they should be in this kind of a configuration, because they're going to go on in a way that one of these is further away and one of them is closer, and etc. And I went over the importance of numbering these things so that you get them on correctly. That's called the firing order. Went over that. We talked about the anti-seize. We talked about the dielectric grease. Bulb grease kind of works about the same, so, you know, had a little bulb grease extra. Using the proper chemicals, carburetor cleaner can be used on several different things, but it cannot be used to clean electrical stuff. What, man? What? All right, so if you're going to clean your mass airflow sensor, use mass airflow sensor cleaner, even though it's very expensive compared to carb cleaner. All right, I think I went over 1A Auto sent me this, and I was able to get for $100 both the new coils, all 4 plugs, and all 4 wires, and I was satisfied with that. It only took about 4 days for that stuff to get sent to me. I did want to mention one other thing that I picked up on a video, and it has to do with this is called a secondary air sensor, I think it's called. I'm not really sure, to be honest with you. And someone was talking about getting a trouble code, and the trouble code was related to their car having this tube plugged up. And so while I was at it, I disconnected these 2 bolts, and there is a gasket in here, right there, you can kind of see it. And there's another gasket right there. So these are number 10s, and I disconnected both of those, and pulled this tube off and cleaned this. And there was quite a bit of buildup of carbon in there. It was really black. It wasn't plugged, but it was pretty black. So that's about it. This is not meant to be a solo standalone video. It just has a couple tips, mostly about cross-threading and over-torquing and checking a couple things. And if you've never done a spark plug replacement, hopefully this might be helpful to you, because I explain things a little bit slower and a little bit more basic, so that people who jump from one thing to the next in their videos and sort of assume that you know what they're talking about when you mention something like the gap, or you mention something like cross-threading, or you mention something like over torquing, a lot of people who've never worked on a car might not have a clue what you're talking about when you say a coil versus an ignition module. They may be totally clueless and have no idea what you're talking about. So this video is meant to be sort of more basic. I hope it's been helpful. Of all the cars I've ever worked on, including the first car I ever worked on, which was a 1974 Honda Civic, this is the easiest car to work on that I've ever worked on. All these goofy zip ties here, this one here is just to hold these wires up. I got this car pretty cheap because the guy couldn't pass smog. Yeah, he couldn't pass smog because, well, if you look over here, you'll see why. Yeah, he had his O2 sensor hanging up against the manifold, and as you can see, that's going to be a little bit of a problem. So he wasn't able to get it to pass smog simply because he didn't invest in a zip tie that costs all of about 1 penny. Anyway, this nonsense here is related to these manifolds, right? So this is called an intake manifold, this plastic piece down there, which is covered with JB Weld and looks really nasty. These are meant to hold this piece, this tubing here that I fixed. There's a whole separate video on this, but basically I invented a new way to fix these. In order to fix the leaking heater hose, so this is a heater hose here that goes into your heater core and then comes back. Then there's another gasket over here, and that's to do with your intake manifold, and all this stuff is one piece. It's molded one piece, but I was able to separate the two pieces here, and then this area here has another separate gasket, and I was able to take a hose, the heater hose, and stick it over the top of the leaking manifold. You just have to see it in the video by using a Dremel tool, some plumber's tape, some JB Weld, and a lot of creativity, and get that thing to stop leaking. I found another video on YouTube where the guy did it by putting the hose on the outside of that, but I also put a hose on the inside of it, and it's been holding. It hasn't been leaking, so hopefully it'll continue to hold. There you go. Hopefully that's helpful to someone.